Imagine a royal funeral so foul that even hardened nobles turned away, retching. Pack dogs slurped at the foul liquid seeping from the king's coffin. What could reduce a ruler once celebrated as a dazzling prince into a decaying giant whose very corpse horrified his court? In the next few minutes, you'll see how recently uncovered medical files and fresh analysis of his remains reveal the shocking decline of England's most famous Tudor monarch. What you're about to learn rewrites everything you thought you knew about the dynasty that changed England forever. The stench of decomposition around the king's body was so overpowering that veteran courtiers vomited in the royal presence. Hounds licked at the fluids leaking from Henry VIII's coffin. Hidden for centuries, the story behind that smell has finally emerged from secret physician records and forensic studies of the king's bones. To understand how a glittering Renaissance sovereign became a grotesque shadow of himself, we need to rewind to a single event that altered the course of English history. The man who overturned an entire nation's faith and ordered the deaths of 2 wives did not meet a majestic end. His final years were a catalogue of agony and corruption so grim that officials buried the truth for almost half a millennium. Everything begins with a violent accident on a cold January afternoon. Picture it. January 24th, 1536, at Greenwich Palace. Henry VIII, still robust at 44, urges his armored charger down the tilt-yard. Sunlight flashes off the plates of his costly tournament suit, each section worth more than a commoner's lifetime wages. Spectators hold their breath as the king levels his lance, thundering toward his opponent. Then disaster. The 2 massive horses slam together with the impact of a modern car crash. Henry, 300 pounds of man encased in steel, hits the frozen ground. His destrier, itself armored for battle, topples onto him. A shocked hush falls. Has England just lost its sovereignty to sport? For 2 long hours, the king lay unconscious, while in Bullen, heavy with the child she prayed would be a boy, waited in anguish. When Henry stirred at last, those nearby sensed something ominous. The spark in his eyes had dimmed, replaced by something volatile. Instead of gratitude for survival, he raged that the contest had been stopped. That afternoon marked the death of the charming scholar-athlete who composed songs, debated theology, and danced till dawn. In his place rose a suspicious, explosive tyrant who would terrorize his kingdom for the next 11 years. Modern neurologists reviewing eyewitness accounts believe Henry sustained a traumatic injury to the frontal lobe, the brain center for personality and impulse control. The evidence is striking. Before 1536, Henry had shown moderation unusual for a Renaissance monarch, remaining married to Catherine of Aragon for 2 decades and rarely spilling noble blood. After the crash, the killings escalated, and Bullen lost her head only months later. Thomas Cromwell, Henry's closest advisor, would follow. Yet the head trauma was only part of the disaster. The same collision reopened an old sore on Henry's leg, an injury from an earlier joust. This time it never closed. And in an England without antiseptics or any concept of bacteria, an open wound could doom a man slowly. Picture living for 11 years with ulcers the size of tennis balls on both legs, forever oozing foul matter, so sensitive that even sheets brushed against them caused agony. Dr. Thomas Vickers, a royal physician whose secret notes lay hidden until the 1960s, described ulcers stinking and painful beyond measure. Attendants were ordered to drain the sores daily, sometimes twice a day, collecting bowls of infected liquid to whisk out of sight. Henry, desperate to mask his decay, experimented with remedies of his own. He had special metal-weighted bandages designed to squeeze the wounds shut, which only strangled the blood flow and deepened the infection. He drowned himself in imported perfumes, blending rose oil and ambergris, and instructed painters to immortalize him with trim, powerful legs. But the rot spread inward. Modern specialists interpreting descriptions of Henry's symptoms suggest he developed chronic osteomyelitis, infection gnawing at the bone, releasing poisons that coursed through his blood. Those toxins brought fever, relentless pain, wild hunger or nausea, and, most dangerously, disturbances in his mind. Imagine the worst toothache you've felt. Then put it in your legs, unending, for over a decade. Add sweats and chills, a brain fog laced with paranoia. One moment, Henry laughed at a jest. The next, he might order the jester's death. He suspected plots in the kitchens, betrayal in his wives' hearts, assassins behind every column. By 1540, just 4 years after the fall in the Tilt-Yard, Henry had executed one queen, set aside another, and was courting Catherine Howard, a teenager half his age. He was now so heavy that attendants had to winch him onto horseback, while Catherine reportedly needed wine to endure his advances. Then came the tipping point. In 1542, the ulcers turned against him. Their discharge changed from pale pus to green, then brown. The odor, once merely unpleasant, became what witnesses called the very breath of death. Henry's bulk ballooned. Denied exercise by searing pain, he ate to soothe himself, swelling from 280 pounds to well beyond 350. Surviving armor proves the growth. In 1540, a 48-inch waist, by 1545 a staggering 54, wider than most modern refrigerators. And the worst was still ahead. As Henry's body swelled, even the palaces built to glorify him could no longer bear his weight. Door frames at Hampton Court had to be widened to let the king pass, and carpenters reinforced floors with heavy beams after sections began to sag under him. They crafted special chairs with removable arms because his bulk no longer fit between them. Yet it wasn't just furniture that changed. Every moment of the king's life became a carefully staged ritual to disguise how far he had declined. He was dressed flat on his bed by 4 attendants who struggled to maneuver his enormous limbs. Ropes and pulleys hoisted him upright before servants eased him into a wheeled chair, always hidden from public eyes so England would never see its monarch unable to stand. But while his body crumbled, Henry's mind was sliding somewhere far darker. By 1544, courtiers whispered of moods that went beyond temper into madness. He would sit for hours carrying on conversations with people no one else could see. At times, he argued with his long-dead father over royal accounts, or pleaded with his mother, Elizabeth of York, gone since he was 11. More chilling still were the moments when he spoke to the specters of those he'd condemned. Witnesses described him freezing mid-sentence during council meetings, color draining from his face as he murmured, "Not now or leave me," then exploding at baffled advisors. One report from the French ambassador tells of the king glaring at an empty chair and ordering Anne Boleyn to stop laughing at him. Paranoia consumed him. He became convinced his servants meant to poison him through the cloths bound round his ulcers. He demanded the foul dressings be brought for inspection, sniffing them before allowing them to be burned. Even his medicines were suspect. Unlucky pages had to test ointments on their own skin before he would permit a drop near his legs. By Christmas 1546, Henry was scarcely recognizable as human. Chronic fluid retention had puffed his face to nearly twice its size. Yellowed eyes stared from deep, swollen sockets. The odor that clung to him could not be masked, no matter how much perfume, incense, or strewn herbs the court consumed. Courtiers approached with pomanders pressed to their noses. Delicate ladies sometimes left audiences only to retch in private. And there was a hidden message in the image we all know, the famous Whitehall portrait. When restorers X-rayed it in 1960, they discovered that the cane in Henry's left hand had once been painted as something far stranger. A staff crowned by a human skull. This was no theatrical prop. Obsessed with death, Henry carried that grim token everywhere, tapping it on the floor as he spoke, a nervous rhythm that unsettled even loyal attendants. Rumor claimed the skull came from a monk of a dissolved abbey, though some whispered it belonged to an enemy who'd met the block. Hans Holbein had painted the truth, but after Henry's death, young Edward VI ordered it covered, unwilling for his father to be remembered as a death-haunted madman. By the last months of 1546, fear ruled the royal household. Henry's moods were so perilous that attendants invented a secret code, colored ribbons to warn of the storm inside their master's mind. Red for rage, black for despair, white for the rare moments of calm. He lashed out over trifles. A sneeze during an audience could see a servant dragged off for questioning as an assassin. A lady who stepped on his robe was banished and her lands seized. Worst of all were the sentences he pronounced on people already dead, forgetting he had ordered their deaths years before. At a banquet in November, he heaved himself upright, a feat requiring several men and leaving him trembling. and bellowed at an empty seat, cursing in Bullen's ghost. "I took your head once, I'll take it again." Moments later, he collapsed, resumed eating, and acted as though nothing had happened. Then January 1547 arrived, and with it the end. At Whitehall, the ulcers on his legs devoured the flesh until bone gleamed through. Dr. Thomas Wendy's hidden notes, uncovered centuries later, spoke of wounds rimmed in black, unmistakable signs of gangrene. The stench of decay overwhelmed every chamber. Servants fainted as they changed the royal sheets, and windows stayed open despite the bitter cold to let foul air escape. Henry's skin turned waxy yellow, his eyes jaundiced to match. His tongue swelled until his words were just damp, choking noises only intimates could decipher. His breath reeked like spoiled meat, proof that the infection had reached his gut. Caring for him became a Herculean task. 6 men strained to roll him and ward off bedsores, though new sores appeared regardless, adding to the catalogue of putrefaction. His legs ballooned until the skin split in places, leaking clear fluid that soaked through bandages stacked by the dozen. On January 20th, signs of total organ failure appeared. The kidneys, overwhelmed by years of toxins from the ulcers, faltered. Urine, when it came at all, was dark and foul. His abdomen swelled with fluid, tightening the vice on his organs and magnifying his torment. In lucid spells, Henry grasped the reality of his fate. He begged his doctors for salvation, promising treasures beyond counting if they could rescue him. And when no cure came, he raged, threatening torture and death to the very men striving to ease his pain. And here's where I need you to pause and think. History like this, raw, unflinching, stripped of the comfortable myths, survives only if people demand it. If you value uncovering truths others tried to bury, don't scroll past. Hit the like button, subscribe right now, and make sure the bell is on so these stories aren't lost again. And if somehow you don't feel moved to do that, then at least explain why in the comments, because if you can look at the brutal end of a king and still choose silence, we should all know why. Though Henry no longer had the strength to sign death warrants, in moments of delirium, he revealed the depth of his terror. He cried out for his mother, gone nearly 40 years, begging her to shield him from demons clawing their way up from beneath his bed. He murmured apologies to his brother Arthur, dead since 1502, for seizing his crown and his bride. Most plaintively, he called for Catherine of Aragon, pleading for forgiveness from the woman he had left to die alone more than a decade earlier. Outwardly, the court kept up an elaborate facade. Proclamations spoke of a king recovering from a minor illness, and foreign envoys were assured Henry would soon receive them. Behind the scenes, however, Edward Seymour and the Privy Council quietly prepared for the inevitable, knowing their sovereign had only days to live. On January 27, 1547, Henry suffered what modern doctors would recognize as a massive stroke. The right side of his face sagged grotesquely, drool pooling on his pillow as paralysis robbed him of speech. Once the man who had commanded the Reformation with his voice, he could no longer even request a sip of water. Yet, clinging to authority, he tried with his remaining strength to sign another death warrant, this time for the Duke of Norfolk, a loyal servant fallen from favor. The effort produced only an illegible scrawl, more ink blot than signature. But even then, attendants were prepared to carry out the order. Norfolk was spared only by the king's own death the following day. What happened next was long concealed. Henry VIII did not slip away quietly, as official records claim. He died in agony. A private diary kept by Archbishop Cranmer, discovered centuries later, offers the sole eyewitness account of the final hours. Summoned to deliver last rites near midnight, Cranmer entered a chamber heavy with the stench of sickness. 6 men struggled to restrain the convulsions of Henry's enormous frame, so violent they cracked the bed itself. Between seizures, the king retched black bile, evidence of internal hemorrhage. The air was so foul that Cranmer had to step outside twice to compose himself. When the spasms subsided, Henry's eyes fixed on visions invisible to others. He spoke to the children he had lost, begging their forgiveness and promising to be a better father if only they returned. Then terror warped his voice as he shrieked about fire and demanded someone douse the flames only he could see. By 2 in the morning, His breathing changed, the wet rattle that heralds the end. Cranmer took Henry's swollen hand and asked for a sign of faith in Christ. A feeble squeeze came, then the grip slackened. At 2:07 a.m., January 28, 1547, Henry VIII was gone. But death did not end the ordeal. Decay advanced with shocking speed, driven by the infections that had consumed him in life. His body swelled as gases built within, filling the air with an unbearable stench. Guards gagged outside the chamber. The council, fearing scandal, hid the news for 3 days while frantic embalmers confronted a horror few could stomach. When they opened the corpse, the liver crumbled at a touch, the heart floated in yellow fluid, and the intestines were black with gangrene. One assistant fainted as a rush of putrid air escaped the abdomen. The team packed the cavity with salt and herbs, swaddled the remains in waxed cloth soaked in turpentine, and sealed them inside a massive lead coffin built to bear the weight. Even that barrier could not halt corruption. During the lying-in state at Whitehall, attendants reported strange pops and gurgles from inside the coffin as pressure warped the lead. Drapes were thrown hastily over the bulging lid. The funeral procession to Windsor on February 14th dragged over 3 miserable days, the carriage lurching through winter mud under the load of nearly half a ton. At Sion Abbey, the very monastery Henry had once dissolved, the cortege paused overnight. There, legend and record converge. With a sound like thunder, the coffin split. Foul liquid seeped onto the floor. By morning, dogs had entered the chapel, lapping at what had escaped from England's once mighty ruler. Servants scattered sawdust and lime to cleanse the place before resealing the broken shell. When the journey ended at Windsor, burial was swift and without the grand ceremony first intended. Witnesses were bound to silence, and the official chronicle told of a peaceful passing and an honorable interment. Only centuries later did private notes and foreign reports reveal the truth. The king who remade a nation perished rotting from within, screaming, and burst apart so that scavengers feasted on what remained. If this hidden history unsettled you, remember how easily stories can be rewritten or erased. Support careful research and fearless storytelling by liking this video and subscribing right now. Don't wait until another chapter of the past is quietly buried. And if you choose not to, tell us in the comments why you'd rather leave such truths in the dark.